Hello, everybody. We're going to be talking about the contents in Chapter 2 this evening, and I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint from our author and go through some of the materials here from our text. So the objectives for this chapter are listed here on this slide. So some of it is really kind of setting a framework for the things that we're going to be learning. And as I mentioned prior to the video starting, there's a lot of terminology that we use, and we watched this video on metaphors where, we had some terms that were being used, and, if you were, didn't exist in modern times and heard the terms, you would have completely different meanings for the things that you're talking about. And then we're also going to be looking at how those metaphors kind of extend well into the modern day. So it goes beyond, the mouse metaphor or the trash metaphor. And why do we use them? And does it make us feel more comfortable with the devices? And it's, remember, the chapter topic here is the human-computer interface. And making us comfortable with that interface, it really is a thing. All right. So some of the things that the book starts to talk about is, how we name the things that happen within a computer system and why we even go there. And they start with this concept of feedback, for example, but they also talk about consistency and instances. Some of these words some of you know already. But for people that are brand new to IT, studying IT and programming, which might be a couple of you in here, the word instance probably doesn't mean what is implied here, and we'll learn what that means. And those of you that have done programming, and object-oriented programming in particular, so if you've taken the Python class already, you'll know that when you create a copy of an object or a class, it becomes an instance, and that's part of where that word comes from. We talk about the scary age that we're in, where we live in this digital era, so it's absolutely possible to make exact digital copies of things, and the ethics that partially goes with that, and then this concept of placeholders. So a lot of us are using our devices now, and I don't know how many of you have devices like this in your own home, but most of our smartphones and other devices that we buy often will have assistants built into it. So for example, if you're an iPhone or an Apple user, you will know who Siri is, right? You can talk to Siri and ask Siri questions. And there's devices by other manufacturers. I'm a US Cellular customer myself, so the assistant on my device is called Bixby, which I never use, by the way. I find it to be quite an annoyance. But I could also turn on the Google Assistant, because that's kind of built into the Google app platform, and do things like, Google, where's the nearest Pizza Hut? And, talk to me and give me a response. And the interesting thing is when we're working with maybe an assistant, if you want to think of it that way, how do you know when the actions actually happened? And one of the things that they mention here is you do stuff on a screen, and sometimes with a computer, things don't happen immediately. So you might ask Siri a question, like, hey, go ahead and play my favorite music. Well, how does Siri know what your favorite music is? Well, you got to tell her what the name of the song is, or the band, or whatever. But often we're waiting on a computer screen, and we get some sort of an indicator that something is happening in the background. So good programmers, believe it or not, will, like if you're downloading a huge file, it's not going to happen right away. In fact, it might take, you see this download is like 149 gigabytes this person's trying to download, and there's 7 more hours of download time. You better give me some sort of a status indicator to show me where I'm at. And if you think of other, these icons that you might be familiar with, and some of them look like they're a little bit Mac-centric, but even on a PC, sometimes we click on something and then you get a different cursor that pops up to show you that you're waiting for things to happen. So one thing that we do expect from our human-computer interfaces basically is that the computer is going to give us some sort of feedback to let us know that something is happening or has happened. And it's an expectation that we have. And we also have an expectation now as computer users that if we're waiting, you better let me know I'm waiting, somehow. And then sometimes, that's also the indicator, if you're waiting and waiting and waiting and nothing ever happens, that there's something wrong too. And that's really part of the interface. So getting feedback to what is going on the screen or what is going on in the system is pretty important. Now, many of us, have been using computers for a long time, and I assume that that's everybody here. But we are typically married to a platform. And when I say a platform, I'm thinking the hardware and operating system platform that most of us choose to use. And for 95% of the world, folks, personal computing is done on Windows-based personal computers. 95% of the world uses those machines for personal computers. And so we have these expectations of how the operating system is going to operate, where the icons will be, where we double click or single click or drag and drop or whatever the case may be. How many of us here are actively using Macintosh computers in any capacity? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Derek, thank you for clicking the no button in the participants window. Somebody remembered that one. So has anybody here, none of you are active Mac users, but has anybody here ever used one just to use one? Or because you had to? Once again, nobody. Okay. Well, I guess I'm the odd man out here because my actual first, real computer was an Apple, even though it was a non-GUI interface Apple. And then when I bought my own first computer, I purchased a PC, because it was a lot cheaper. But over time, I have owned both platforms congruently. And basically since the early 90s, I've pretty much always had a Mac and always had a PC, and at least one of each. And I'm not trying to push you towards one platform or the other, not at all. And then they mention this other thing, and they say Linux Mint, but strike the word Mint and just look at the word Linux, where there are literally, hundreds, if not thousands, of different versions of Linux, but there are some that are more popular than others, including Ubuntu is probably top of the heap for popularity. Linux Mint is probably a close second, and I'm not thinking on a server level, by the way, but I'm thinking on a consumer personal computer level. And so that's an operating system that is capable of running on literally any type of hardware. And in some cases is a great choice, by the way, if you have older equipment that might not be capable of running newer versions of the Mac OS or the Windows OS, but still gives plenty of life to the computer and allows you to do all the same types of things you can do with Windows and the Mac OS. And at some point later on in this course, I will demonstrate the operating systems for you. So I'll show you a couple different flavors of Linux and why you might even want to consider using it, maybe instead of Microsoft or Apple products. But despite, sure. Right. Well, that's an excellent question. And no, you would not even purchase the operating system separately because guess what? Just about every version of Linux for personal computers is completely free. So that's one of the reasons why people do it. But yeah, most computer manufacturers, when you go if you walk into Best Buy and you say, hey, I'd like Ubuntu Linux on my machine, they'll be like, what? They won't even know what you're talking about. But there are some computer manufacturers where you can order from their website. I believe Dell is one of them, where you can actually customize a system. So you can buy a canned system and then you can customize it and ask them to pre-install it for you. They will actually do it. Most Linux installations, though, are done after the fact. So the machine will come with Windows, and then people will download the operating system and load it in the aftermath. That's a great question. Now, the reason we're talking about the different interfaces, regardless of which platform you're on, folks, there are things that are common across all of them. So all of them have graphical user interfaces where you can move a mouse around the screen. And then when you launch a program, whatever the window happens to look like, well, here in this case, I'm on a Windows machine, and the window has a title bar, which I can click and drag around, and I can make it bigger and smaller, and then I can maximize it and minimize it, and then lose it altogether, or click the X to close it. And if I was on a Mac, by the way, these three controls, which don't look like this, they're yellow, red, and green circles, are in the opposite corner. And then when you move to a Linux operating system, they might be on the right, they might be on the left, or both. But regardless of that, the same functionality is still there. And then if you launch a piece of software, most of the menu choices will be similar too. So most programs will have a file menu, so you can create a new program or save a file or close it. Most of them will have a menu where you can cut, copy, and paste. Many of them will even have toolbars that are graphical where you can do some of those actions from the toolbar with similar icons. So notice here in PowerPoint, there's a thing that looks like a diskette to save, and that's really common in a lot of programs. So it's not by mistake, by the way. The fact that Apple led the way with this, so when the first graphical consumer operating system came out, it was the Apple Macintosh in 1984 that brought it to the consumer. And it was revolutionary because prior to that, we were basically looking at like these green screens like this, and very primitive and not very exciting. And then all of a sudden we're in a windowed environment where you can run more than one program at a time. Wow, you had a trash bin, so if you deleted something, you could pull it back. You had the click and the drag of the mouse, and all these conventions that we're now used to. And because people became used to that graphical operating system first, they kind of had the benefit of like, okay, well, this is kind of how it's done, and so everybody else just kind of copied it, and then we followed the convention into the future. And so we kind of expect that when we use a piece of software, there's be certain menus that'll be named the same, and we'll have certain features that'll be present in just about every piece of software. And and it's kind of interesting when you're presented with new software. How do you deal with it? One thing that I often do, are like, hey, look at all these. What does this do? What does that do? And I don't know if you guys are like that. Like if you've never used PowerPoint before, one of the things you might do is open it and just kind of go through all the menus. And maybe you do that, and maybe you don't. Maybe you're afraid to like mess with it because you're going to break something. Just remember, it's a piece of software. You're not going to break a darn thing. The worst thing that's going to happen is you have to uninstall it and reinstall it. That's about as bad as it'll get. And so if I launch PowerPoint and come in here, the first thing that usually happens is you see a screen like this. And if I want to make a new PowerPoint, well, how do I do that? You just basically click in there and start creating one. And here I am just doing it. And maybe you don't even know what to do at that point beyond there. But hey, thank God we have YouTube and tutorials and books and things like that. But the whole point is, and this is the blazing way part of it, is, hey, I've never tried this before. Let's see what happens. I've used other pieces of software that are kind of like this. Let's check it out. Maybe this is better, right? And so that technique, some people refer to it as blazing away. Now, what you guys just watched me do inside of PowerPoint is I boldly went into the menus. Well, of course, I've been using PowerPoint now for 30 years, or however long it's been out, basically since day one. But I just went ahead and created a new instance, or a blank instance of a new file native to this platform. So if I opened up, let's say, Word or Excel instead and created a new file, I'd get something different. But whatever its default thing that it does, it'll start with an empty version of it. And so most programs have the consistent feature that you go to the file menu and there's usually a new option, and that's how you create whatever that thing creates. So for example, like if you were like creating a blank instance of like maybe a contact entry in your phone, This might be a screen that you would see. And that concept of instance, we're creating a new instance of something that this creates. And that's where that word kind of comes in. Those of you that do programming, of course, know that it means something else. Another thing that technology has kind of brought to us in kind of a scary way is the ability that when we have digital information downloaded to our machine, we can make an exact replica of that information by just simply copying a file. And the book goes into the process of explaining that because the information is digitized, whether it's a photograph or a video or a document or what have you, that all of it in computer memory and storage is really a series of binary information digitized, zeros and ones. All we have to do is replicate those zeros and ones, and we've replicated whatever that thing is. And this is one of the scary things about the digital age. So, for example, when I teach web programming, it's very possible for students to just go out, look at a website, and I'm just trying to find one here that's maybe pertinent to look at. Maybe even we'll look at my silly personal homepage, and you can come in here, you can right-click, you can look at the code I used to create it. It's all right there, right? And you can just come in here, select it all, right-click, copy. You can even go in there and, right-click, save as my image, drop it into a folder, publish it on the web, and you got an exact copy of what I did. And there's this temptation, unfortunately, that a lot of people think they can shortcut, the creation of things by stealing other people's work. And unfortunately on the web, it's very easy to do. Very easy to copy people's content. So that's created really a problem, for a lot of industries. Because digital copies, as long as nothing fails in the copy, are exact replicas of whatever it is you're creating. The book goes into the process of talking about, the difference between analog and digital information. And, I grew up, and most of us, at least the gray-haired contingency here, grew up in the analog world, right? So, like, when we wanted to listen to music, we would go out and buy record albums or cassettes or 8-tracks, right? And those are all analog mediums. And analog is kind of a really fascinating technology because, like, my voice, you're hearing my voice speak right now, and my voice is coming to you through a waveform. So my lungs are moving air and I'm producing a pitch, and my microphone is picking it up, and it travels through the air as a wave. And that wave actually carries an infinite amount of information of detail within it. The problem with digital, and this is kind of a fascinating thing with it, is digital sometimes will take those analog waveforms. So if I just draw on the screen here rather than like maybe pull up a slide or something, if I draw on the screen here, so my voice might be creating a waveform that's like this, right? And if I could, it would be perfectly smooth. Or maybe it would have little ripples in it. But the waveform is, if I could zoom in on it, I could keep zooming in and it would be infinitely detailed. If I did the same thing with this line that I just drew on the screen, and most of you that have done graphics before would know this, I would get to the point where I would start to see that, like, the curves are not really curved. They're just little dots. Because at some point you have to decide when you're going to digitize and how small of a piece you're going to break it into to make the whole. So like the whole of my screen is really a collection of 1,600 pixels, little squares across, and 900 little pixels going down. And with the right level of zoom, I can zoom in on each individual pixel to discover that each pixel just holds one color, and that's it. And that's as detailed as it can get. And so to get really high-res displays, why do we have 4K TVs now? Because that increases the pixel count significantly in both directions, so it appears smoother. But the truth is, analog information carries a lot more detail. Unfortunately, analog is also hard to reproduce. So like maybe the original analog recording of something sounds amazing. And then, like in the old days, we'd buy the record albums and we'd record them to cassette. And if you had a great cassette deck, wonderful. And then your friend would take the cassette and make a copy of it for himself. and then that friend would make a copy for somebody else, and you got like 3 or 4 people, copies down the line, and there's a significant degradation of quality in the process. So that's why we have digital, but digital is not perfect, by the way. So I always like to talk about that. Some of it comes from the fact that dealing with music in my life, and the whole analog and digital thing. These days, it's so easy for people to capture things and record things. And if you look at YouTube, there's an explosion. People we all have webcams. We all have microphones on our computers. You got your smartphone in your hand. You can create digital content and publish it on the web within minutes. And you don't even have to know what you're doing. But then somebody can come along, download that video, and steal it from you and publish it as their own. This is the problem. And it's an exact digital copy. There's no degradation of quality. So we get issues that happen. When we look at the whole concept of reproducing things, they start getting into this copy paste thing, and how we, for example, I can copy and paste words from one place to another. So we have this assumption that we can just go in there and copy and paste. And I always want you guys to be cautious, like whenever you're working on schoolwork and you're out on the web and you find content. Just because you're finding it on the web doesn't mean you're free to copy it and put it into your own document and claim it as your own. In fact, academically, folks, you guys should realize that that's a huge no-no. And academically, it can get you in a boatload of trouble. So if, like, for example, I asked you to write a paper and then you go out to somebody's website and copy large chunks of it and don't put in a citation, that's plagiarism. And most institutions, if you plagiarize something, very likely you're either going to fail that assignment, more likely you're just going to be kicked out of the class, and if you do it again, you get kicked out of school. Not only that, but it goes on your record, and good luck getting into another school. Right? And so don't do it, is basically the answer. If you're borrowing anything from anybody, give credit where credit is due. So like if you come up with this great idea and find somebody else's great idea, tell us where it came from. And remember, academic work is always built on the shoulders of the people that have come before us. And there's no embarrassment in admitting that. And if you found some great idea or thought or concept or words or image that you're borrowing from elsewhere, make sure you cite where it came from, who created it, where it came from. In some cases, if you're grabbing stuff from the internet, by the way, even though you're able to copy it and cite it, doesn't mean you're allowed to. That's a whole separate issue. We'll talk about those issues as we move forward. But please don't steal stuff from people. Create your own. Like when I teach web, and Jill and Cindy Lou know this about me, right? Like when we would add images to web pages, academically we can kind of copy anything on the web we want because we're not doing it for profit. But I always tell students, hey, if you're going to put pictures on your website, take some pictures with your phone and create your own images. Or if you want graphics or a logo, create your own. Why not? And there's value in learning how to do it. Another really kind of fun tool that a lot of programs have, and PowerPoint has this, Word and Excel have this, for example, is the tool called Find and Replace. And I know a lot of you know how to copy and paste, but a lot of people don't know about the Find tool. So most programs that you use will have this commonality where you do like Control F or Option F on a Mac, and I can search for, I don't know, copy, for example, and it will find it in the document. And then I can also do this command where I tell it to replace, right? So if I find the word copy, replace it with, don't copy, for example. And I'll just do one, just so you can see it. So if you go back a slide now, where did it do that? I don't know where it did it. Maybe I should, I'll Control Z that one, by the way. But that's a really powerful tool, and especially when you guys get into coding, for example. A lot of times you write code and you want to change things, or in a document you want to change things. I always say be careful when you use Find and Replace. Never click Replace All until you've tried Replace once. Make sure it's working correctly. But that's a really powerful tool. Most of our major software packages have these tools built in. Even our web browsers have this built in, by the way. And that's one of those things. Now, some people actually use that technique with intent. So for example, like maybe you're typing a paper, and instead of like typing this guy's name over and over again because you just forget how it's spelled. Maybe you just put in TUR, and then later you use find and replace all to fix it all the way through the document after you figure out how to spell it correctly. But that way you can keep moving and create your document even though you don't know the right spelling. Or if you're looking at really long, complex documents, you're looking for that one piece, use the find feature. That's a very handy little thing. I know a lot of you know this already, but all right. So now we're going to get to that metaphor concept, right? And isn't it kind of interesting? It says, in computing, a metaphor is an icon, image, or approach used as a representative or symbolic thing relative to computation. And they did, the video was silly. It was obviously like somebody's class project or something, for some other school or whatever. But it got the point across, right? So the girl said mouse and she brought a mouse, and of course that's not what they mean, but a lot of that is used in technology and it extends into many different things. Now, the whole concept, we think of a computer, and this is kind of interesting. We think of a computer as a desktop computer. And the reason that even became a thing is because prior to that point in time, computers filled rooms or giant, closets, and were in big, giant metallic racks with air conditioning units, and they weren't something you could put on a desktop. And then when somebody was able to build one that you could put on a desktop, hey, that's a desktop computer because it fits on top of my desk, and now I can actually use it at home instead of connecting to it at some giant organization. They do talk about that first personal computer, which was called the Alto, and if you guys want, we can kind of Google that here. And of course, it doesn't bring up, although, okay, it did bring up at least one version of it. So this was the Alto computer, and kind of primitive, but it had some really advanced features to it. And I know this is kind of a small image. But it did have a computer screen, it had a keyboard, and a mouse, and a graphical operating system. And this is way in advance, of Steve Jobs, and Wozniak putting out the Mac in 1984. And I think it's ironic that we don't even think of Xerox as a computer company, but those inventions are pretty profound. And the fact that they didn't follow through and become the first company to do it is, I'm sure the people that worked on that were probably, we came up with that, damn it. We could have made that money. And so who said before that Apple is really good at taking other people's ideas and making them easy to use? Who said that? Is that you, Austin? Derek, okay. Yeah, thank you, Derek. That's very astute, by the way, because that's very exactly what Apple did on a lot of their inventions. They weren't necessarily first, but they figured out a way that people would actually want to use it. They made it appealing. And if you think of now, isn't that funny, Derek? Because it's exactly what I was going to mention on this slide. Because when we think of Xerox, we do not associate it with computing. We think of it photocopies. Almost like Dunder Mifflin or whatever. It's like we're not thinking computing. But yeah, they were pretty revolutionary in this field. The first Apple computer, and this is kind of fun to look at too. And no, that's not the one. This is the one here. So they started building it with components like this. And notice the computer screen that they used, they just connected it to a TV set. And the first Apple computers did not have VGA ports or anything like that. They used RCA video plugs. And then ultimately, they built a wooden case for it. And then I saw a picture of their first mouse too. When they made the first mouse for the Mac, that was made out of wood too, with a little button they bought from Radio Shack. It's hilarious to look at, but they had the conception. They were able to wire the stuff together themselves, teach it how to talk to the processing of the computer and then do stuff with it. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I mean, the idea wasn't theirs, but they still had to, physically build it and come up with it, how it works. And so I think that's just astounding that they took something that they literally built in the garage and built like the most cash-rich company on the planet. Apple is known for having more cash on hand than any corporation, by the way. Very, very liquid company. So they're probably never going down, by the way, just because of that. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to come back to the Apple thing a little bit later. So they did, release, the Apple Macintosh in 1984 with the first consumer GUI interface, and it was so far ahead. It took Windows. I mean, Windows. They did release the first version of Windows a year and a half later, but it was not a graphical operating system. It was what we call the graphical operating environment. So it was really DOS. I don't have my command line window open anymore, with a program that sat on top that pretended like it was an operating system. And, by the time Windows actually got usable, was well into the 90s, by the way. Nobody really used it until we got to version 3.1 for whatever. I don't know why not 3, but 3.1 was the one that caught on. And that was really the first usable version. It was almost 10 years later, 9 years later, that really started to take off. When we got to the Windows 95 platform, something else happened. And that was when the internet kind of came into the mix. So we'll talk about those when we get to the operating system stuff in this class, but that's, I think, pretty important to note. They go into the metaphor for the mouse, right? They talk about how Apple didn't invent it. In fact, they say Stanford Research Institute actually developed it, and they don't even remember why they didn't change the name. They just used the metaphor because they kind of made them think of that. I think it's kind of all historically very interesting. Well, here's that picture of that first Apple. Oh no, actually, this isn't even the Apple one. But notice this one was built out of wood too. Isn't that interesting? And it looks like they walked into Heathkit, bought a button, they bought a roller wheel with some sensors on it. And I think it's just very, very. No, that is the Apple mouse, isn't it? Yeah. And that was their signatures. They built the stuff out of wood. Hey, why not? It's not conductive. It's cheap. It's easy to shape it. If you don't have like a plastic mold injection machine handy. Now, the thing that we've kind of evolved into, though, which I think is fascinating, is now we're all getting used to the touch interface of computers. And I don't know how many times you guys have done this. I do have, for example, a touch screen on here, and I don't have my mouse here, but whatever. You guys can see I'm clicking on things here on my screen. And I'm doing that with my finger, not my mouse. Now, most of us, we have our tablets, our phones, and now our laptops, most of which are touchscreen. But have you ever walked into the office place and you're used to using a touchscreen computer, and you start touching your office computer screen and it doesn't do the same thing? Or what I've seen very comically is people that don't realize that Mac, even the brand new Macs that you buy now, laptops, are not touchscreen. And Windows users are like, what do you mean it's not touchscreen? Why would I buy this? And so I think that we have a whole new era of interface components that came when handheld devices with touchscreens started coming out. Remember when we were talking about that whole kind of looking into the future thing, and we had the guy with the H.G. Wells book, and I was talking about how it's important that you kind of envision what's going to happen before it happens and dream big. The touchscreen concept really came largely from science fiction once again. And one of the first real public displays of it was when Star Trek The Next Generation came out. And everybody would make fun of the original Star Trek because they had really primitive buttons to run their spaceship, and switches in some cases and light bulbs. And then The Next Generation came out, and here these people are sitting at these kind of these black interfaces with computer projections on them, and they were doing stuff, but there were no buttons, And now I wonder, is that really what it's going to be like now? And I don't know if you guys have watched any of the newer Star Trek series that have come out, like Star Trek Discovery, if anybody's seen that. But there's kind of an interesting device they have there where they have somebody that can basically use this technology to get the ship instantaneously jumping across time and space. And the interface is not buttons at all. Has anybody seen that? No. Okay. Well, just to kind of give it away, basically they have this goop that allows them to interface with what they call the mycelial network, and a human being basically psychically or nervous system connects to the interface and controls it with his mind, not by pressing buttons. So it's kind of an interesting thing, and it makes you wonder. They're dreaming this thing. What I've noticed in a lot of these science fiction shows is they dream it, and then a little bit later we have it. And so some of these things that seem kind of crazy might not really be so crazy after all. But they kind of round things up here by looking at the typical touch gestures that we're used to now. So like swiping, tapping, double tapping, dragging, pinching or in or out, two-finger scroll, if you guys see that often. And some of that works, like for example on my touchpad. So I'm like scrolling through the slides right now by using two fingers on my touchpad, and that's pretty standard on most modern systems now. But kind of going back to this whole thing, this has kind of been, what the book is identifying as the kind of the latest, greatest way that we've evolved from like having to push buttons to control the computer to just moving our fingers around. And I would also argue that our voice is now a primary thing too. So if any of you have like Alexa at home, or you actively use Siri or whatever, these are things that you contend with on a regular basis. And finally, here's a summary slide, and I know you guys can read the book for yourself, but I think this is a kind of an interesting way to kind of step into computing and think of it as, how do we interact with the technology as human beings? And I always want you guys to remember the fact that it's here to serve us, not the other way around, right? And if, Derek, like you pointed out, if you can take something that is pretty complex and make it easy for people to use, most likely it will catch on. And so the whole concept of the smartphone, for example, where we've gone literally and within a decade and a half from ground zero to almost complete adoption by everybody that can afford one. I think it's pretty amazing when you think about it. All right, folks, I'm going to pause the video here, and we're going to take a break. So please stand up, stretch your legs, and step away for a little bit, and I'll see you in about 5 minutes. I want to make you guys all aware, as our next activity, of some services and tools that are available for you here at Gateway. And given that this is kind of like a first semester introductory class, and many of you might be brand new to Gateway and all the things that we have to offer, there's two main collections of software that we use in just about every class. And I want to talk about how you access these things, and I know some of you are already very fully aware of it, but even being completely aware of these products from the get-go, I guarantee you will find that there are parts of these products that you probably have never touched before, which is pretty exciting, I think, because no matter how many years I've been using Microsoft Office, for example, or the Google Apps Suite, I always find new things, and both companies are really aggressive about creating new products all the time as well. Sometimes I wonder what the point of them is, but you know what, we're going to actually play with a new product tonight too a little bit as we're doing this, to kind of hopefully have some fun with it, and just to show you that maybe you can find some creative way to use these things that you haven't thought of before. And other capacities, the whole point of this is also to show you how to get to these tools if you're not really aware, because that can be the case. and to show you that you have alternatives, and then what does the real world use, and that might be a different answer professionally than it is academically, by the way. And so the activity that we're working on is this one here, which is to explore both the Google Apps Suite and Microsoft Office 365, both of which are available to Gateway students for free at no cost. Now, many of you know that if you already have a personal Gmail account, the Google Apps Suite, in most of it, is already available to you for free without any cost anyhow. Google just puts it out there. So if you sign up for a Google account, whether it's a YouTube account or a Gmail account, usually it's one of those, you get a collection of products that comes with it bundled into the platform. The same is true with Microsoft, and they're making strides now, I think, because in some ways they kind of fell behind a little bit what Google was doing. But I do want to let you know that Microsoft still makes a large majority of its money from selling Microsoft Office to people, because large corporations use that as the standard for business communications and document formats. They also have some tools in there that, no matter how cool Google Apps is, don't really touch what some of the Microsoft Office products can do, by the way. So let's start first with the Google Apps Suite. I'm just going to begin by just simply going to my Gmail account, and please don't read any of the messages here. I'm going to move it really fast so you can't. But I want to point you to the Waffle icon that is attached to the Google Apps. And that Waffle icon is available directly inside most of their products as they're running, with some exceptions. But for the most part, whenever you see this icon, that's what Google calls it officially, is the Waffle icon. And I'm going to silence my phone here because one of my Facebook Messenger chat streams here is blowing up right now. But this Waffle icon, if you click on it when you're inside of Google logged in, you will see a list of common software packages. Now, I do want to point out this. Right now, I'm logged into my Gateway account. So the list of products here is for enterprise level Google Apps. If you were to log into your personal Gmail account and click that same button, much of the same stuff would appear, but in a different order. And some of it is harder to get to on a personal account. A core of what we do with the Google Apps Suites will be towards the top of this collection, by the way. So if you think about it, the fact that we have a search, right? That's the number one thing that drives Google. Well, I guess we use that pretty often. The Gmail right up at the top. And then the calendar tool, which a lot of students don't even know they have, and a lot of Google account users don't realize is, for me, one of the apps I use the most in here actually is that calendar tool. And then the Drive tool, which is their online storage repository, and then we start getting into some of these others, which I think of as the typical part of the Google Apps Suite, which is basically their online Office suite, the Documents, Spreadsheets, and Slide tool. I do want you to scroll down, though, and take a look that there's much more. And one of the things they have here is Hangouts. I know a lot of people use that for personal, chat and video communications. And its very close cousin called Google Meet, which is basically the professional version of Hangouts. Very much like the Zoom software we're using right now. They're really kind of synonymous, and I'm not sure why they made this change. I think the Meet software's got some higher level tools and allows for more people to join sessions. Of course, YouTube is part of their product suite, the Maps, and then notice, for example, they have sites. You can make websites. You can create user groups. They have chat tools, ads, photos, Vault, Forms, Keep, and a couple here that maybe you've never touched before are some of the neat ones you might want to consider playing with. And one I suggest that you experiment with first is this one called Google Keep. And Google Keep is this interesting product that allows you basically, if you got let's say you found a really cool link, maybe like this one here, right? Google Keep allows you to basically take notes and post them to this thing, whatever you might want to call it, so you don't lose them. And I might title this cool link that is actually useless, or whatever you want to call it, and then you can close it and save it. And if you notice the toolbar, right, here's one of these metaphors where they, you might not know what these things do, but you might have seen these similar icons in other applications, so it kind of ties into our metaphors. But I'm going to go ahead and close it, and then it just kind of adds it to here. And what I initially experimented with this for was, I'd go to a meeting or something or a seminar, and somebody would mention a link, or I'd find something and I don't want to forget it. And so I would just come in here, create a Google Keep entry, and so like you can see I have some stuff in here that I've saved, and some of it is nonsense and some of it is actual. But it is one of those services where you can, by the way, download the app and install it on your phone, or just bring it up through a browser, and it allows you, like, whatever I save here, I can bring up on any of my other connected devices. So if I go to my phone, log into my Gateway account, bring up Google Keep, I can get to these same links. And so this might be one of those tools that if somebody's like sharing cool information with you and you don't want to forget it, might be a way to keep the information. So that was kind of their impetus with this. Another one that is actually quite brand new is called Jamboard, and this one just came out recently. And I actually have an instance of it open here, and if you go to the core shell, by the way, there's a link to the Jamboard right here in the activity. And I've enabled this Jamboard, and we'll talk about it once you get in there, so that anybody with the link can come in here and put stuff on the Jamboard. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a title on it. So I'm just going to say Fundamentals of IT, Unit 2, Google Apps, whatever. I'm running out of ideas here. All right, just to have a title on it, and you can see pretty intuitive to use. I just click the text tool. But the main part of what you do here typically is you just click on one of these tools that you have here, and most people will add what they call sticky notes. And so you can choose the color of your sticky note, and if you want to put in a thing like, hey, this is cool, and save it, and you guys can kind of toy with that all you want. And then once it's in there, notice you can just pick it up and move it around. And so if you guys don't mind, go ahead and just click in there and just throw something in there and check out how cool this is. The other thing that I thought might be kind of fun with this, well, that's an interesting one. That line disappears after you draw. Right? We're typically like if I'm doing Zoom and I draw on your screen, it doesn't go away for a while until I clear it. This one kind of dissolves. You can also, draw shapes. Right? You can grab little tools here and rotate it if you want. Yes, and please play with it, and have fun with it. Now, you notice how the format of the platform that we're working on is in the shape of a slide. So it's kind of like being able to put together like a PowerPoint or something where people can collaboratively work on it together. And this is, I don't know like what we might use it for, but maybe I'll try, maybe if I have some presentations or something, maybe instead of creating a PowerPoint in the future, maybe I'll come in here and then people can come and add their own notes to it. If you notice the interface up top here, you can add additional slides, right? You see that? And we can change the zoom level, and you know what? I can like fill objects that are selected with colors, and change my pen colors. I can set a background if I want. I mean, you can get pretty crazy with this, and I don't know what I just did. Oops. Did I just erase everything? I think I did. That's all right. Start over again. And just experiment with the tool. And maybe I'll find some creative ways to use this. But this is, does anybody think of like a way we might use this in the classroom? Yeah. I'm kind of on the fence with it too. But I think it's kind of fun. I don't know why they created it, why they called it Jamboard, but it does try to compete with other products. There's other products out that kind of do the same thing. Does anybody know of one that's similar? Yeah. The big one is called Padlet. And maybe you've even been in classes where teachers have asked you, to, yeah. And you know what? It's totally easy. This is just like Padlet, but maybe better. I don't know. I'm still like, well, the jury is out for me. But if you look at the little activity thing here, what I asked you to do is try some of the applications, especially ones you haven't used before, and then add content to the Jamboard sharing what you tried and what it does and maybe how you liked it or might use it. And this is not obligatory, by the way, but I'm just putting it out there. But something you might want to think about. So if you ever do a presentation, you could build a slide, right? Present it to people, and then you could allow people to come in and throw comments into the slide live. And so I think it could be useful in some ways. I haven't found a practical use for it yet, but I'm sure I will come up with one. And you know what? If anything, maybe it gets you intrigued about like dynamic screen sharing of content. And speaking of that aspect of Google Apps, when we get to the real core Office applications of apps, which are docs, sheets, and slides, you can click through to them through these buttons, but I usually like to go to the drive. And the reason I do this is because, first of all, I can see all my files and folders, and I'm big on file management, by the way. But if I want to create a new like Office type of document, I can come in here and create documents, spreadsheets, or slideshows. And all of them are browser-based, so we don't have to install any software. And actually what's kind of fun about this is if you hit the More menu, you'll see that there's actually more things available in just the document part of it, including the Jamboard. They put that in here too, and a text editor and Google Sites and maps and drawings. But the thing that I think really propelled this forward and made it really popular is this feature that I'm about to demonstrate. And I want you to notice that I created a new document, and like most document editors, I can just come into the window here and start typing. The other thing that's kind of neat is watch when I type, right up here, as I'm typing, every few seconds it's saving. Now Microsoft Word does do that, but it's on a timer, so it's like every 5 minutes, I think it is, it saves. Google Docs saves instantaneously with every change. Not only that, but it records all the changes that you make and who made them, by the way, and what time they made them, etc. But if I click this button here to share this document, sure, I'll name it that weird name, you get this interface here, and you can notice right now that currently anybody here at Gateway who's on our domain, and that does not include you guys, by the way, you guys are on mail.gtc.edu. All the faculty, staff, and admin are on gtc.edu. That's why our email addresses are different. But you can actually click this link, and I know some of you know how to do this already, where you can decide to share it with specific people, or hey, just put the link out on the internet. Anybody who has this link can come in here and edit this document as long as they have this link. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop it in the chat window. And so what I'd like you guys to do, and I know that most of you have probably done this before, but every once in a while I do run into people that are like, wow, you can do this? And it's kind of revelatory for the people that have never seen it before. What's really astounding to me is when I first encountered this product, it was nearly 20 years ago, by the way, when it just came out, and it was in beta form, and I was teaching a class, and the student's like, Ty, did you see what Google put out? And I'm like, what? Oh my God, you got to check it out. And so we went into it, and here we were trying to teach something in the classroom, but then we spent half the class doing this. The fact that all of you are in the document now, right, and we can all type in the document simultaneously. Now, food for thought. If you don't do this normally, you might not see how it would be practical. But when we have meetings here at Gateway, let's say with our faculty or with admin or whatever, we often will be working on collaborative documents. So we'll go to a meeting, they share a link to a document, and it might be a spreadsheet, and it might be a document, and we look at it, and sometimes we have to complete the paperwork to complete a process, and we do it together on the screen. And we can all look at it, we can talk to each other, and have conversations about it, and get, more importantly, get the work done without having to leave our home or our office or however we're working. And this feature of Google Docs was the one that really, I think, brought it to prominence, because having a browser-based editor, that's pretty cool, and I don't have to install software. But having one where other people can join in and we can all work at the same time was revelatory when it first came out. It was really quite a to-do. And now, if you're not used to working with people like this, you might want to consider it. So maybe you already work somewhere and you have the same products available, and you're like, wow, you mean maybe I could stay at home and we could do the meeting from home, and we could all still be on the same document and we still get the work done, right? And when I first started at Gateway, in my first week actually, and our department chair at the time, Cheryl Euchre, some of you might even know her, she was like, okay, we're having our first department meeting. And I'm like, well, where do I go? She goes, nowhere, you just do it, we're doing it through Hangouts. And I was just like, oh, well, I got to do video calls, so that was like a thing too. Now we're all kind of used to it. But yeah, we've been working this way for quite a long time at Gateway, and a lot of companies that are IT savvy are the same way, right? And it's wonderful, frankly. All right, let's move on now. And not to be outdone, Microsoft Office has made some significant inroads too. And the first thing I always tell my students is, unfortunately, you can't just magically have access to Microsoft Office. Okay, so for most of you, you guys will go to My Gateway typically, and you will log in. And then you'll notice that there'll be an icon here for Office 365. Now, if it is your first time that you're doing this, when you click on this, you will be taken to a screen where you will be asked to sign in or register. So what you will do, if it's your first time, is you will register, and you register using your Gateway email account, and it will recognize mail.gtc.edu as having free access to Office, and it will create an account for you. It will be a separate password from all the other Gateway systems, by the way. All right. But if you click through to that, it's going to try to log me in, but you notice that I dropped right in. And from there on in, you don't have to go through My Gateway to get there. You can just go to office.com, by the way, and log in with your Gateway credentials. Some people, by virtue of either wanting or needing Office or having it included with whatever computer you purchased, will already have a personal Office account, by the way. It is important to note that Microsoft also actually does give it away for free. So if you have like a live mail account, or like an Xbox account or something like that, or Outlook mail account, that account also includes access to the basic version of what we're seeing on the screen here. And I think it's just Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, maybe OneDrive and OneNote, and it kind of stops there. It's been a while since I've looked at it. But for Gateway, once you're logged in, now you have something that's very similar to what Google is doing, but I'm going to argue it's actually significantly more powerful, by the way. So I'm going to click on Microsoft Word just so you can see the comparison here, that I'm operating Microsoft Word in my browser, and I'm able to create a document and bring up a document editor right in the browser. This is without installing anything. And now it's not Google Docs. It is truly Microsoft Word. And just like with Google Docs, I can come in here and type whatever. But interestingly, they also have a share button in this product. And I'm just going to get the link here, copy it, and once again, I'm going to drop it in the chat. I think Microsoft has done a nice job recently of updating these tools to make them actually easier to use than Google's, by the way, which is, to me, so like Derek, kind of going back to your other comment that you had before, is like taking, something somebody's done before and doing it, making it easier for people. Well, that's what Microsoft basically has done with Office 365, in my opinion. And so I didn't have to go through nearly as many screens to share this with you. I don't know if you guys noticed that. With Google, I had to like click and choose a couple things, and it was like 5, 6, 7, 8 clicks. With Microsoft, it was like 2, 3 clicks, much more efficient. And it intuitively knew that I wanted to share it with everybody. Isn't that cool? Yeah, and I see what you're typing there. Who's typing that? Yeah, and the answer, Cindy Lou, is no. Yeah, I know. But if you're just doing basic document stuff, so if you're doing like basic Word stuff and basic Excel stuff and basic PowerPoint stuff, which is what most people do, by the way, this works great. But if you're looking to do like a high-level mail merge that pulls data directly from a database and then does like a bunch of Excel macros or something, that's not going to happen here. But it does work in your browser, so you do not need to install it. And you can even run it on your phone, by the way. So I've had a couple of students that told me, I'm like, well, how'd you, this paper's kind of weird. How did you make this paper? He goes, well, I typed it up on my phone. I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, it's possible. I don't recommend that, by the way. Now, interestingly, if we do go back to the apps area, and so I'm just going to go back to the main screen here. The one thing that you can do with Office that you cannot do with Google Docs, by the way, is you can install it. So you see this button up here. It's not easy to spot, but once you hover over it, you see it. Because of the licensing that we have here at Gateway, you guys are also allowed to download and install Microsoft Office on up to 5 devices for free, as long as you have an active Gateway student email account. So as long as you're an active student at Gateway, you have free access to Microsoft Office. Yes. And it's the full professional version. Yeah, you don't, but that's because you're only seeing the most commonly used apps. When you click this icon over here, well, all of a sudden, you're going to see, well, you know what? That's a really good point, Cindy Lou, because Access actually has been replaced, at least in the online version, with a product called Lists. Yeah, a little uncomfortable, actually, when you're an Access person. But the installed version still includes Access if you download and install. But in the online platform, and then when I clicked on it, actually, I'll click through on this since you seem to know what it is. When you click the new list button, all of a sudden it starts to smack of the same kind of stuff you can do in Access. So it's not truly a database tool, but it's really close. So the installed version of Access is different. But when you really start to play with some of these and explore them, to me it's kind of mind-boggling because there's tools here that are not in the installable version. So for example, Power BI or Dynamics 365 or what the heck is this and what the heck is that and what the heck is this and what the heck is that, stuff you've never even heard of. And some of these are really worthy of checking out, by the way. So for example, if you are ever tasked in the class to create a PowerPoint and do a presentation, you can, okay, go ahead and do a PowerPoint. Or somebody will be like, fine, I'll just do it in Google Slides, whatever. But maybe now I've given you a couple of ideas. So like maybe you could find a way to do a PowerPoint using Jamboard, for example, and allow your users to interact with you. Isn't that kind of interesting? Or you could even use a product like Sway, and I'll click through on this one. I don't usually click through, but what they do is this is kind of like this weird kind of like hybrid between a slideshow, a website, and kind of like a free-form content creation tool. This is the best way I can even describe it. And I was first introduced to it like 5-6 years ago. Somebody did a presentation with it. I'm like, and the person finished the presentation, and everybody's like, "How'd you do that?" That was really cool. And then we all noticed that it's all web-based too. So like I think for like a silly class that I took, I got to sign in. Okay, so I signed me in. Thank you. And this is kind of the creation aspect of it. So you create kind of like these cards or whatever, but then you play it, and when you play it, I want you to watch what happens. It like animates, and if you look at the graphic really carefully, the graphic is moving. It's not like a static background. It's like zooming in, and then when you click the button, you know, and I really didn't do much with it. I was just goofing around with it. I didn't know what to do with it, honestly. But I was just playing with it just to see how it works. And that's a really primitive example. There are people out there that create really impressive things. So this is just one tool in this suite. It's like, oh my God, and it's super easy to use. And so if you want to like kind of leverage, you know, that like, hey, I'm going to create a new blank sway, like what we were talking about. You just dive in and create stuff, and I'm like, okay, I'll title it, you know, put in a name, create a background, and then you get like basically kind of like a scripted storyboard kind of creation tool. And what's fun about this is on most of these things, we think of PowerPoints as being kind of like a top to bottom tool. And the reality of this one is it can go top to bottom, left to right. It can organically go to different directions, and it doesn't have to follow the path of a PowerPoint. Kind of like Prezi, if you guys have ever seen that tool, where it's more of an organic slideshow that doesn't necessarily follow a particular order. And I think very, very fascinating. And I get it that it's not a tool for everybody, but when you start looking at all the different things that are attached to this, it becomes a very powerful platform. The other thing I want to point out to you is, which I think is a very useful tool, especially for students, is the Onenote software. So if you're a note taker and you want some electronic format to take notes, I think OneNote's a marvelous product. I also really like the fact that, you know, since Microsoft has connected up LinkedIn to its platform, LinkedIn becomes another app within this app suite. So if you guys know what LinkedIn is, I hope, which is basically a professional social network, and I know a lot of you do know what that is, and some of you might not. But LinkedIn is also a tool that's linked up to kind of our app interface at Gateway. So I'm going back to the course shell now, folks, and pointing out this little link. And I probably should have included this in the list of topics, called LinkedIn Learning. And I think many of you have probably used this tool. But it's basically the old lynda.com platform that is a collection of complete canned video courses created by people who are experts in the subject area. You know, so for example, you can go in here and pick kind of a category, so you can look at like business things. And all of these, by the way, are related directly to technology, so they're all like technologically based. You know, in the creative arts, you can look at, you know, like if you're into audio and video and animation and things like that. Or you can go into technology, where we would probably exist. And those of you that are in the data science program or data analyst program here, they have a whole section on data analytics, by the way. And when we do teach some of our data analytics courses, for some of the courses, we do not have textbooks, and instead we use content from LinkedIn Learning to augment our data analyst offerings, by the way. One thing I find pretty fascinating too, and you know, I was showing this to one of my web classes earlier today, the same kind of spiel I'm doing with you guys right now. And we recommend, like, people that are starting out on HTML, you should come in and check out this course. And then right below it, you know, I noticed this one, Full Stack Development with Flask. And then I looked at the author. Check this out. Now, some of you know who this is. Christian is actually one of our Gateway instructors who you may encounter along your pathway. And you know what? It just kind of shows me, you know, that the quality of people that we have teaching here. And Christian has done a bunch of these videos, by the way. You know, and frankly, I don't know where he finds the time. But then again, he doesn't have children, so that's probably where. You know, so you know, this is a wonderful resource, by the way, and I really encourage you guys as you start getting into your studies. You know, especially with you know, like data analysis stuff. They have so much information here, and we will leverage this, folks, because what they have here is such a rich set of content. And feel free to explore well in advance of even taking the courses. Absolutely. Now, if you've never operated this platform, the one thing that I will tell you is as you start to learn this stuff, you will notice the format that they use. And I think it's a crazy powerful platform. Why is this better than YouTube, for example? Well, first of all, YouTube doesn't necessarily have complete courses, right? They might have snippets of videos. In fact, you will go to YouTube and look up one of these topics, and they might have one of the short videos posted there right from a course. And then the whole pitch is, if you thought this was really good, you should get the whole course. And then they try to sell you on it. But notice how they kind of break the screen down into sections and they categorize things, right? And so what this allows you to do is if you're learning a specific thing, you can go right to that video directly. So if I wanted to learn about trend lines, I can click through. All right, and you can hear the guy, do his spiel. The other fun thing about this is they do provide exercise files that go with the content. It's completely transcripted. I love this transcript tool because you see how it highlights entire sentences as I hover? I can actually click and go directly to that content by just clicking on the words. And I think that's cool. But I think my most killer feature with this, and this is true on YouTube too, and I think I've showed it to you guys, is the ability, if you're listening to a drab, boring part of it, to just speed it up and have it go faster so you can get through it. Also very cool, and why it's kind of neat that it's linked up with LinkedIn, is if you go through these courses and you watch, let's say, this whole series of videos, at the end of it, you can take the chapter quiz, and then if you pass all the quizzes in this course, you earn a badge, and that badge will appear on your LinkedIn profile. So if you complete like a data analysis course, this is the thing that, believe it or not, is getting people employed, by the way. So some people are like, hey, I studied all this stuff in school. They didn't teach me about whatever, but I went to LinkedIn Learning, and I took the course myself, earned the badge, now it's on my profile. And people get hired on that, and that blows me away. And so there's value to this. And this is one of these services, once again, that's not free, and we as Gateway people have complete access to this entire library. What blew me away the first time that I came in here, the school sent out an email about it, and I logged in. Okay, what is this thing? And what was on the screen when I logged in, and this is what was on the screen, right? Okay, so like Dennis, like I'm into music and stuff, and Austin, I know you play too, right? And I logged in, and this was like the splash screen on top. I'm like, you're kidding me. So I clicked on it, and it was my first time on the platform, mind you. But what this course does is it walks you through the complete setup and tear down of a Rush concert, from unloading the trucks to setting up the audio gear, how they make the settings on all the equipment, what equipment they're using, how they're mixing the sound, how every little aspect of it, top to bottom. I watched the whole darn thing. I was just like, this is cool. And it wasn't even technology related. This is about like audio engineering predominantly. And there's so much cool content like this. So you might find stuff in here that just trips your trigger that you just go off and study. Hey, why not? It's free. But you can see the topics here, right? Just fascinating content and really well done too. The quality production, quality content. All right. So I think that's enough of a sales pitch on LinkedIn Learning, and I know most of you are aware of the platform already, but these are services that we have available to us here at Gateway for free. And this is just tip of the iceberg stuff. There's other stuff that we get for free here too. As we kind of move through the course, there will be times where we will need some of the software presented here. and I will give you a fair warning on it. So, Cindy Lou, you talked about Access, for example, and another product that we're going to look at too is Excel. So later on in the course, we will play with those products, but that will require that you know how to get into Office and download it and install it in order for it to work. All right. So finally, the last thing I want to brush upon are the Chapter 2 exercises. Now, very often in class, I will do a portion of the class where if I have like a book assigned thing like this, where we open it up for discussion. I'm looking at the clock right now and having a realization that's probably not a realistic expectation right now. There's not really a lot of time to have a good discussion. So I thought instead what would be kind of fun, and I was hoping to do this, is I'm going to play for you a video. And, Jill and Cindy Lou, you guys have probably seen this, like I say, Dog and Pony show before. And I'm trying to close up some of my tabs here to free up a little memory on my old computer here. But I'm going to go to YouTube and I'm going to bring up a video. I am going to record it into the recording because I think it's historically significant. And I'm going to use it basically as, I think, a way to get you guys thinking about things and putting things in perspective. So let me just pop over to YouTube here really quick. I'm going to make sure I'm on my school profile, not my personal. All right. See, it knew I was like looking up Rush stuff, so now it's got Rush on my feed here. And what I'm looking for is the 1984 Apple commercial, which appeared during the 1984 Super Bowl. And some of you may have seen this before. But we want to do the historical context thing. So at the time, you could buy personal computers, and you had a lot of choices back then. You could buy an IBM, you could buy an Apple, you could buy a Tandy, a Commodore. Does anybody think of any of the others? Coleco, I think, made. I forget. A whole bunch of companies made personal computers, and there was no clear favorite at the time, honestly, either. So there was nobody out there that really led the market. IBM kind of thought they did because they had the name, but really their technology was pretty far behind in that field. What they really had was the business market. But Apple did have a very successful run with their early models, like the Apple II and the Apple I. Very primitive computers with command line interfaces. And interestingly, maybe before I do that, did I do this last week? Apple, and I think I have to do it with eyes. Yeah, that. So this is like my first computer system was one of these, right? Right. And I had the dueling floppy thing, and I had the RAM bumped up to 64K, from the native 16K. I had it souped up. And people didn't have very powerful machines at the time. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this, and I want to put it into the historical context here and ask this question. How many of you are familiar with the George Orwell book entitled 1984? Okay. And I see there's a good number of you that are. And Cindy Lou, it strikes me significantly that you are not. Because typically what I find when I ask this question is people who are like, younger than Gen X, basically. So like people that were born in like the 80s, 90s, and beyond, typically are unaware of George Orwell. But when I was a student in school, this is like mandatory reading. So was Animal Farm, which is another one of his famous books. Does anybody know what the basic premise of the movie 1984 or the book 1984 is? Right. And there's a really famous concept or term that comes out of this 1980 There you go, Big Brother. If you guys ever hear that term, it comes from that book. And there's a important concept that goes with that, where Big Brother is always watching. And the strange thing is they had this vision. This book was written, I think, in the 30s or 40s, that there'd be this technological future where everything and everyone is completely monitored and controlled by this central entity called Big Brother. Right, so they thought it would happen by 1984. Not quite. We were still using command line computers at the time. But now, right, I walk down my street, everybody's got a Ring doorbell, so I'm on their video feed. And I drive through an intersection, there's cameras. And I walk through a store, and there's sensors that detect my phone and push ads to my phone and things like that. And I would say now we're really truly in the era of Big Brother, where everything we monitor online, Google, every time you guys do a search on Google or watch something on YouTube, they're monitoring you and keeping data. Everything you post on Facebook, Facebook is like monetizing that data and selling it to people, folks. So we really do live in the Big Brother era. But at the time, there was kind of this divide, that there were these huge companies that were building computers, like IBM, right? And IBM was kind of like the Big Brother. And then Apple comes out with this. And so let's just watch the commercial.
Introduced Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
All right, so for as cheesy as that is, right? Some people call it like the greatest commercial ever. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but from a historical perspective, there's kind of some really interesting things here, and tying it back to the whole metaphor concept. So first of all, Apple has their logo that has a bite out of it. What's the significance of that? What's the metaphor there? Okay, so obviously none of you guys are like Bible-thumping Christians here, or if you are, I apologize for insulting you, because that's not my intent. But what does that refer to? It refers to the story of Adam and Eve getting tempted to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, right? And here we are, the apple, and it's got a bite out of it. It's like, we're all in, we're biting that apple, right? So that's like the one little metaphor there. But now you got the 1984 metaphor, where they're saying 1984 is not going to be the 1984 that we were told it was going to be in the future. And it was very accurate. It wasn't. And here we had this machine that came out where, and I'm trying to see if maybe we can pull up first Mac computer. There we go. And if you can see the screens here real carefully, you have these self-contained computer, keyboard and mouse. This actually had a hard drive inside of it. That was revolutionary, so you didn't need to put a disk in to boot it. It also, if you could see the screen real carefully, it's got windows, icons, menus that we're kind of used to, a trash can, and all the modern conventions of modern computing. Even more revolutionary, and a lot of people don't know this aspect of it technologically, is the fact that the operating system was truly a graphical operating system. And in the era when IBM and all these other companies were building their operating systems on 16-bit hardware, 16-bit CPUs, Apple put out a 32-bit CPU. And it took the Windows world well into the 90s before they replicated the same thing and had a 32-bit operating system. Even when Windows 95 came out, which could run on a 32-bit CPU, was still 16-bit at its core. Windows really didn't become a 32-bit operating system fully until we got to Windows 7. Or actually, it was Vista, but we'll call it Windows 7 because we want to forget Vista. And I think that historically is very, very interesting. And once again, it ties back to that little, thing that Derek put in the chat window before. And I see you put another little thing in there, which you said, which is a little funny because if Adam and Eve's story happened, they would have probably been eating pomegranates instead of apples. Absolutely. But it is one of those things where they took basically some really advanced stuff and put it out for the consumers and made it easy to use. And if you want to watch a really fun video, if you guys are into this kind of thing, there's a video out there from when Steve Jobs appeared at I think it was like the Comdex conference way back when this was released, where he went up on stage and demoed, the Macintosh and like how great it was. It's a really fun watch, by the way. And at the end of the video, he gets the computer to do text-to-speech conversion. So they were doing text-to-speech back in 1984 on that machine. So he typed a message on the screen, and the Apple spoke to the audience, and standing ovation, kind of thing. Just revelatory, compared to like the green screen IBM thing that was going on. Very, very fascinating stuff, folks. And it once again really kind of changed the way that we approach things, whether we realize it or not. And now we are in this era where the Macintosh computer and the way that they built it also kind of went through this transformation where in the 90s, there was a point where Steve Jobs left the company and he started to build a different company. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that. But when he came back to Apple, he brought with him a variant of the Unix operating system that then became the new core of the new Mac. So when we went to the Mac OS version 10, none of you are Apple people, but that was a major step forward. And what had happened is Apple got rid of their old operating system, and instead of building on their old OS, they built on top of Unix or Linux. And it's one of the reasons why Apple devices are so much more stable than Windows machines. Windows machines have finally gotten stable, I think. But if you talk to anybody who uses a Mac, they use their laptop, they're done doing something, they just close the cover. They don't log out or, shut down. Mac users don't shut down. They'll come back to it in a week or whatever, open up the cover, right back where they were, and don't even think about it. Try that with a PC. It does work with a PC, but it's just starting to work on a PC. Apple is way ahead in a lot of technologies, but there's a premium price to pay. So, all right, folks, that's what I have for tonight. Just make sure you keep up on your readings. I am about to release Unit 3. I just have to make a couple tweaks to the assignments there. Make sure you finish the Unit 2 work and then read ahead to the next chapters. All right? Any questions or thoughts before we wrap up?